My name is Bastien Sachet, and I'm the CEO of Earthworm Foundation. Earthworm is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is the regeneration of the soils and the forests of our planet. We've done this for over 20 years by working with companies that are committed to change and helping them answer three key questions. In this series, we will discover the women and men who are asking these questions. Join me to learn more about what drives them and their ideas to regenerate our world. Today I have the pleasure to welcome Etelle Higonnet. Etelle is a senior advisor at National Wildlife Federation. Previously she worked at Mightiest. This is where we met with Etelle. And today we'll learn a bit more about her life as an activist and the key topics that are dear to her. But before we dive into the interview, Etelle, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm a passionate defender of Mother Earth. I think that's one of the first things I usually tell people, and the first thing that comes to mind when my friends and family describe me. But I think I'm a really loving person, and family and friends mean so much to me. So I think if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say the most important word for me is love.
It's a nice one, a nice way to align all the objectives indeed. So, as I said, you're senior advisor at NWF. Previously, you worked at Mighty. You were also working with Greenpeace before. So you've always had an activist role for Mother Earth, indeed, and raising consciousness and awareness. So, for you, what defines an activist? What makes an activist?
You know, I think that 90% of the battle is just showing up. As an activist, it's about taking that energy and that feeling of concern that many people have and just doing something about it. It could be as simple as making a phone call to a lawmaker or showing up for a protest. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be, I don't think of myself as a particularly smart person or a particularly talented person, but I show up every time, and I attribute most of my success to just trying really hard over and over and over. Persistence, you know.
What made you become an activist at the beginning when you started your career and you started to rally these activist groups? What was the impulse? What made you make that move?
I started out working in 2 war crimes tribunals and worked with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and an organization called the International Human Rights Law Institute. And I would say that the moment when I decided I wanted to do human rights work, I was just a child. My parents brought me to visit Maya ruins in this beautiful place called Copan, but we flew through Tegucigalpa, and I saw children sniffing glue and being beaten up by a local police. And I remember I tried to get my parents to go to the police station to punish the police officer for beating the children, because I thought, how could we live in a world where children are sniffing glue and the police can just hurt a child? That seems so wrong to me. That should be illegal. That should be the crime. And from that moment on, I knew I wanted to do human rights work. So I just always knew, I guess.
And the transition from working on human rights topic to the environment, although they are very connected both, was there a special trigger, or was it just a natural evolution as you saw, you know, the environment collapse around us? What made you make the transition?
Well, actually, I think they're one and the same. You know, because when you look at IUU fishing, pirate fishing, the worst kinds of fishing that are destroying our oceans, typically those fishing vessels that have the worst environmental track record are also the ones that have the worst human rights track record. You look at how cocoa is tied to deforestation, but also a lot of child labor. These human rights and environmental things are so intertwined, Bastien, and I feel like you know, the problems are intertwined, but also the solutions are intertwined.
So, Etelle, in regard to your long career, because it started at the age of 5, as you said, what would you say are your biggest victories, or the victories as an activist that you are the most proud of?
One is when I worked at Human Rights Watch in West Africa, And I did a big, deep investigation into sexual violence, very widespread sexual violence in Côte d'Ivoire during the civil war there. And it really started all the different sides discussing something that had been very taboo. I know it didn't stop sexual violence, but sometimes the best thing you can do is to help other people be empowered to change their fate and just to start a conversation. And then I guess the second thing is helping to start a lawsuit against the largest supermarket in Latin America, which is called Casino, for its deforestation and human rights violations connected to the meat industry and its meat sourcing. And then I think that the third thing is I love all the mentoring I've done of young people. That's my favorite success, is all these beautiful young environmental stars that I've had the pleasure to work with, and just seeing them soar and become stars.
Blossom.
Yeah. Blossom, yeah.
That's really cool. It's absolutely phenomenal, the amount of young people who are just coming and are ready to support or to do something about the climate change. What's your view on today's situation, and is it enough? Are the companies doing enough? Are they not doing enough? What's missing to have this sentiment that yes, we can do it?
I think nobody's doing enough. I think our lawmakers are by and large failing us, and they are not doing enough. There's a handful of really courageous lawmakers who have stood up for forests and for humanity around the world, who've been climate champions. But they're so few and far between. Most of our lawmakers are derelict in their duty to protect us. So I just don't know why these people who work for us, why don't they care about us? Because we're all going to die if they don't speed up their game. And then companies too. Many companies have been so courageous that by and large, big business is really slow. And we need everyone to join onto the Science-Based Target Initiative. Everyone must go for the race to zero, but like now. And it has to be real. It can't be for 2050 or 2060. It's got to be for 2030. We're in such a crisis. I think the business sector somehow hasn't cottoned on to the urgency.
Etelle, we see a lot of commitment from companies. We see the commitments from government. And we feel that more people are aware, and I guess every entity is sort of trying to make some kind of climate commitment. In parallel, and maybe as a consequence, we hear less of the big activist NGOs as we used to. The big campaigns on deforestation, the big Greenpeace call-outs. What's your analysis of the landscape of activist NGOs and how they are evolving at the moment, and why?
For me, it's a great sadness. But at this crucial moment when climate chaos is staring us in the face, and every activist group should be stepping up to the max, I see a huge amount of infighting and a lack of love, a lack of trust, a lack of sharing amongst the activist green groups. And I see so frequently this unfortunate tendency to nitpick your allies. Oh, this law that they're backing isn't quite perfect, so I don't like it, so I'm not going to support it. Oh, that campaign, I didn't really like their messaging, so I'm not going to support it. That lack of love, of camaraderie, it is hamstringing the environmental movement.
Yeah, I think what you say resonates, and I feel that as a human organization, NGOs have not been spared by the challenges of changing or adapting to a new way of doing things. And so in your view, because you mentioned values that are very aspirational, very positive, concretely, what could be done to actually make a change or come with a new proposal in your view, or maybe in the organization you're working on at the moment?
I think a spirit of radical collaboration has to start to animate the environmental movement. Way more communications amongst each other in cross-cutting campaigns, instead of saying, oh, well, you work on methane and I work on oceans and she works on cars. Actually, it's totally interconnected. And then that has to go side by side with us all individually doing better. How can we be less exclusionary, more open? How can we be allies with indigenous people who are the true defenders of forests around the world and have been neglected and sidelined? We've got to be very strict with ourselves, but we've also got to be loving with each other.
I wanted to just focus a little bit on cocoa because you've worked very intensely on cocoa. We've met and worked together on this topic. Issue around cocoa used 20 years ago to be child labor, and everyone focused on child labor and remediation problems. It's then become deforestation, and I think you've greatly helped in putting it on the table with maps, etc. Agroforestry seems to be a great answer, and I know you've been a strong proponent of that at COP26. How is it a more holistic proposal in your view?
If you really revolutionize cocoa to do robust agroforestry, you're kind of re-greening all the forest that was destroyed in the deforestation problem, and you're rewarding people for having more and more forest. But agroforestry also does other stuff. If you make it farmer-centric, you can have a retirement tree for the farmer. You can have food security trees for the farmer. You can have income generation trees for the farmer so that the farmer is not hostage to the vicissitudes of the market shocks of just cocoa with monocropping. You know, the farmer has like 5, 6, 7 different kind of revenue streams. When you've got agroforestry, it does help on this deforestation aspect of what's been plaguing cocoa and led to this kind of forest cataclysm. But it also does something for farmer poverty. And that in turn helps minimize some of the risks of child labor. When you don't take that more holistic view of what is the problem and how do we solve it, then I think you are doing yourself a disservice, but also the cause,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely, and I think agroforestry maybe is an opportunity concretely to bring people together. Today at NWF, what is your focus and what are you specifically focusing on at the moment? And what's your kind of 3 years plan? What do you want to achieve in the next 3 years?
$1 million question. So today at National Wildlife Federation, I've been focusing almost all my energies on trying to help pass these 3 deforestation-free bills in the US.
Okay.
The federal bill, the California bill, the New York bill. I do have a 3-year plan. I want to take a sabbatical, and then I want to take on the world's coffee industry. There is no major NGO working to try to transform the coffee sector in a meaningful way. It just doesn't exist. I think that people's passionate interest in coffee and emotional attachment to it
Absolutely.
could unlock a revolution in consumer demand for minimum price, farmer empowerment, an end to child labor, but also agroforestry and healing soils and an end to agrochemicals as much as possible, wherever possible, and a total end to deforestation. My dream is if I do this campaign right, there will be no more deforestation in coffee.
I'd love that. I think that's. I was thinking we talk more just about the fight, the activism, and you know the energy that you can deploy to fight, and was not expecting that we'd talk so much about love. So I think it's been very fruitful, very good to exchange with you, Etelle. I hope it's been useful to everyone to learn a bit more, and of course you can reach out to Etelle on LinkedIn. You can contact her. I'm sure she would be absolutely thrilled to answer your questions. And if you have an interest in coffee, keep it in mind. There's something coming. Thank you, Etelle.
Thank you so much.